Hello and welcome to episode 23 of series 3 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. As I mentioned on the last episode, we're now moving towards the end of the year and the end of this series of the podcast, end of series 3. We have 2 more episodes after today's episode. So on the 6th of December, I have an interview with Douglas Spencer from Spencer Brenneman. Douglas is going to be telling us all about the relationship between internal communications and branding. This is a topic we've covered before on the show, the fact that we need to make sure that our branding, external branding, marketing is aligned up with our internal comms, so we're actually delivering on those promises that we're making, and Douglas is going to be telling us all about that. And then the final episode of this series and the final episode of 2022 is an interview with Sarah Turton. So Sarah is from an organization called Civica, and Sarah has a massive amount of experience in internal comms, and she's going to be telling us all about the challenges and opportunities and pleasures and delights of leading an internal comms function. Many of our listeners would either be in that role themselves or aspiring to lead an internal comms function. Sarah's going to be sharing all of her experience that she's got over her career about what she's learnt from her journey through internal comms and where she is now, which is leading an internal comms function in a large organisation. And as I said, that will bring us to the end of Series 3, and we're going to carry straight on into the new year. No break. 2 weeks will be obviously the natural break over the Christmas holiday period, but there are no extended break, just a normal 2-week period, and then we'll be straight into series 4, which I'll tell you all about on the next show. So that's everything for upcoming episodes. Just a couple of other quick things to mention. Another one of our free events coming up on the 15th of December. This is geared towards internal communicators who are looking to help their leaders to share the organization's big picture, the vision, the values, all of the things that we sometimes struggle to get everyone to understand and listen to about the strategic way we're moving forward and how all of these things fit together. So we're going to be sharing a free webinar with you on the 15th of December called Helping Employees to Understand Your Organization's Big Picture. It's free to join. As I say, it's a webinar. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 p.m. That's UK time. So if you're in different time zones, you'll just need to bear that in mind. But if you go to our website, thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, go to our events. It's the first event listed, or the first set of events there. There's multiple dates, but the 15th of December is on there, and the registration system will take into account your time zone, so it'll tell you what time zone that will be for your local time zone if you're not in the UK or in UK time zone itself. As I say, totally free, and it'd be great if you can join. It's always really popular. It's a very popular webinar. We always get lots of people coming along to that and some really good feedback. I think that's everything that I wanted to mention about things going forward. The one final thing I did want to just mention about today's interview before we go into it. This was an interview that I recorded on the day that I came down or found out that I was COVID positive. I wasn't feeling brilliant at the time, but I wasn't anywhere near as ill as I got over the next few days. However, it did mean that I could not access my normal recording equipment. So I recorded this through my AirPods, my Bluetooth AirPods. So whilst my interviewee's audio quality is fantastic, mine is a little bit tinny, not up to the usual standard, but I've listened to it back, and I think it's still listenable, so it shouldn't be too annoying, hopefully. But as I said, hopefully you understand the reasons for that. Anyway, I'll shut up now and move into the interview. Thanks very much. Internal communications and employee engagement have often shared a very close relationship with learning and development. Learning development is another area of the business which is often driven towards helping people to change behaviours, to build capabilities, and to be able to do things differently that we need to do in the future. And obviously that has a strong overlap with internal communications and to a certain extent employee engagement as well. So what I wanted to do was explore that relationship in more detail, and not just from a theoretical perspective, but very much from a practical perspective. How are internal communications teams working with learning and development teams? What are some of the shared objectives that they have? What sort of partnership opportunities exist? And also, what sort of role does internal communications play in developing capability within the organization in terms of supporting capability development and transformational change within the organization. That is often what learning and development are trying to achieve as well. So that's what we're going to be looking at in the interview today. As I said, not from a theoretical perspective, but very much from a practical, pragmatic perspective, speaking to a practitioner who's worked in internal communications for a number of years, but also has practical experiences of working with learning and development to create those partnerships. Another element of this interview is something that we've had as a recurring theme throughout other episodes of the podcast, which is the role that internal communicators have in developing their own career. Often that is something that they have to shape for themselves, and they have to find opportunities and development opportunities themselves. And again, there's a lot of overlap there with the way that a lot of learning and development is being done within other organizations at the moment. So that's what we're going to be looking at in today's interview. How do we connect internal communications and learning and development within our organization? My guest today is Emma Tucker. Emma is Head of Internal Communications at Temenos, where her job is to ensure that 7,500 employees are informed, motivated, and inspired by the work that they do for the banking industry. Emma is a seasoned practitioner who takes pride in providing clear and employee-focused communications. Emma has worked on a range of projects covering brand strategy, change management, channel development, corporate responsibility programs, and many more. Emma is passionate about internal communications and its ability to add value to the organization. So good morning, Emma. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Craig. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. And just before we continue, I'm just going to mention that I've just tested positive for COVID this morning, and that means I'm a little bit fuzzy headed, although I feel fine. But also, I'm recording this in a slightly different way, so hopefully the sound quality is up to our usual standards. But anyway, so thank you, Emma. Well, just for our listeners, just whereabouts in the world are you now, so we can position you, please?
I'm based in the UK. I live in Hertford, in Hertfordshire. So I'm doing this from home, as has become the norm since COVID. I hope you don't have too bad a time of it, Craig.
Thank you. No, that's fine. Thank you, Emma. So, anyway, tell us a little bit about. I did mention Temenos, and it's probably a name that not everybody listening will be familiar with. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the business, your current role there, and then we'll go on to talk a little bit about your career in IC, which you've got as I said in the introduction, got a lot of experience.
Yeah, sure. So Temenos is a banking software company, and we've been in business for 29 years now. And work with banks kind of all over the world, from great big banks that most people will have heard of and that will bank with themselves, to really small kind of niche players. I think probably are, if you, I guess most well known at the moment is like PayPal. We do a lot of
Hmm.
work with them, but
Okay.
we also work with like credit unions in the United States. Really, anywhere that there's a bank, you can probably find some connection with Temenos, and we're really. I think that what's exciting about the company is that um, banking is constantly changing and software is really changing, and those two industries together, we really kind of see ourselves at that kind of sweet spot of really helping the banking industry to kind of really embrace technology and move forward so that they can give a better service to their customers, really. So it's a challenging and interesting sector to work in.
Excellent. And I said 7,500 employees. What's the spread geographically in terms of the types of roles they do, and what are some of the communication challenges that you have?
Yeah, we're hugely spread all around the world, actually. So our biggest employee base is in India. So that's about 5,000 of our 7,500 employees are based there. And that's predominantly where our kind of product development work takes place.
Hmm.
And then we then kind of work on a kind of regional model to really stay close to where the clients are. So in the regions, it's more based around our kind of sales teams, our delivery teams, and then obviously we have a sort of corporate central function as well. I think from a comms point of view, Our challenges are, I guess, fairly common in that there's lots of things going on in the business. There's lots of competing priorities and voices and information to share with people. And it's really trying to kind of help connect the dots, make sense of what's going on, really keep people aligned to where we're going as a business. We're going through quite a lot of change, and I think, like all organisations, change can feel quite constant. It
Mm.
is in reality. So it's really just about making sure that people are clear on the priorities, and I think that that can be a challenge when you're talking to a global organization who've each got different kind of local priorities as well as what they share at an international level.
Okay, okay, excellent. Okay, very good. So, we're going to be talking about the relationship between internal communications and learning and development, and the sort of as I was saying, I think we spoke of a couple of weeks ago when we prepared the interview was that my experience is that we often get contacted by from my business, so we get contacted by internal communications people, but also L&D. We often get involved with partnerships between internal comms and L&D. So we're going to explore that in a bit more detail and how that partnership works. But just before we do that, I'm interested in your own career background, because obviously there's been a lot of learning and development taken part in that. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a very brief run through, some of your own career highlights, some of the key moments for you from in terms of building your experience, and I guess what the balance was between kind of formal training versus kind of on the job, picking it up, experience, just being involved in really, kind of pivotal projects, that sort of thing. So, sorry, there's a lot to talk about there,
That's all
but
right. No, we
so
can we can
yeah, yeah.
unpick it
So,
as we go, maybe.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So tell us a little bit about some of the key moments in your career, and also how you've kind of learned to do what you're able to do now.
Sure. Well, I think for me, like from a really early age, I always had it in mind that I wanted to do something that made a difference, and I didn't really know what I meant by that. But I was inspired by people who really kind of cared about what they did, and this probably says something about my age, but the I always remember the Bob Geldof Band-Aid Feed the
Mm,
World campaign, and that really struck a chord with me because he was really clear on, helping people. There's starving people out there in the world, and we've got a responsibility to do something about it. And so I always imagined that I would probably work in, I don't know, like international development or something to that effect.
mm,
And I studied politics at university, and I think that spoke to my kind of need to understand the kind of the big picture and why
mm,
people do the things they do. And I think that has kind of that. And I can explain it a bit more if you like, but I think that kind of need to connect to something bigger probably speaks to what I love about internal communications. And I think,
mm,
like most people, I sort of I fell into it rather than chose it. I'd finished university and I started um, working for a couple of charities in marketing and communication roles, which I didn't really know what they would entail, but I think they were really about telling stories, telling the story of the charity to the people out there that we were looking to kind of you know make donations to, but
yeah,
also explaining to the people who were beneficiaries of the charity, what the charity was doing to help them, and it was really storytelling, and I think that that's what suddenly kind of was like, okay, I really like this, and then I did that for a couple of years, and then I took myself traveling for a year. And again, I think through that I learned lots about myself and other people. Um, and then when I came back to London, I started working at BNP Paribas, the bank, and I had no interest in banking, if I'm honest. I didn't
mm,
know anything about it. Didn't It was just a job, really, if I'm being brutally honest. But I really quickly found that I liked it. I worked with really great people it was really interesting. The bank was involved in so many different things, and at sort of a couple of years into my job there, I got the opportunity to apply to the corporate communications team, for a job in internal communications, even though that I had no idea what internal communications was at that point.
Mm,
Um, but I spoke to people and I looked into it, and obviously I applied, and I thought actually this could be really interesting because it kind of spoke about purpose and impact and connection, and I think it sang to that need in me to kind of be part of something bigger and to
mm,
influence something. And it really was that. It was, incredibly fast paced, really varied, really interesting, and actually banking was pretty interesting too. And again, full of lots of people doing interesting work who were passionate about what they were doing. And it was telling their stories that I think I've always, enjoyed doing. And I stayed at BNP Paribas for 12 years. I did kind of different roles in
mm,
that time, both in the sort of UK comms team, but I also spent some time in Paris as well. Um, and it was, yeah, I did like a really varied range of projects, loads of things around diversity and inclusion,
mm,
around compliance, lots of engagement things. The bank is a big sponsor of tennis and the arts, so we did lots of
mm,
employee engagement things around there, which were really, really good fun. um, and then I kind of came to a sort of natural end at the bank. I'd been there, like I say, for 12 years, and I knew I had to kind of branch out, do something different. Um, and so I saw the opportunity at Temenos, and I thought, well, hang on, this is good because this is related to banking, which is what I do,
mm.
but it's all about digital. And in the bank, that was what everybody was talking about. How do we really transform what we're doing digitally to kind of provide a better service for customers? And so I thought, how, this could be really interesting. And they didn't have a kind of fully functioning IC team at the time. So I was able to kind of go in and set that up. And I've
Right.
been there sort of 4.5 years now. And in that time, I think I've brought some standards, some structure, and also a lot of support to the business to help them communicate where, and a bit of consistency really, because I think
Yeah.
that's what companies struggle with, is like how do we make sense of all this stuff ourselves, and then how do we tell that to the people in the company that need to know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And yeah,
lots of learning on the job, I guess,
yeah,
is
and that's what I
probably
was going.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say because I think what I've picked up from what you've just been saying there, and this is kind of what we're going to go on to talk about, is that there's this. I used to work for a company that had a really, really, I think one of the best sort of models that I've come across in not only being in my corporate life but also external as well for in terms of what a good career should be built around. And there's some of that was around. Just what you would call traditional learning and development, but a lot of that was what they called like critical experiences, which was all of that being involved in, transformational opportunities or projects to really kind of cut your teeth on, really complex, multi-dimensional sort of things. And I think that's one of the great things about internal communications is, there's that often that ability in where you have that strategic role in IC anyway to be able to be able to shape that and to really craft what is a key part of any change program, which is obviously the communications around it. So it sounds like you've had lots of those opportunities. And have you had, because a lot, any kind of, I know when we talked about this when we spoke originally, and I know there's institution like the Institute of Internal Communications is offering now some great programs for personal development. But what's the balance of what you've picked up by doing the job versus formal training that you've had? Just as a sort of rough idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, very early on in my internal comms career, I had a great manager and mentor who
Mm,
really taught me the importance of thinking strategically.
mm,
I also went on courses like the Melkram Black Belt with Suju Hurst, which was invaluable, such good
mm,
training, and a shame that that doesn't exist anymore, in my view,
mm, mm,
um, because that really gave me lots of frameworks and ways of doing things to kind of really structure the communications that I was crafting. And I think that that's often what people can struggle with is,
mm,
you know, communication is a bit messy. It's about people. It can be quite intangible at times, and I think bringing a bit of structure and rigor to it helps people to take it more seriously, because you do have to take it seriously. It does need
mm,
to be
mm,
thought through fully if you're going to do it properly. But yeah,
mm,
I think a mixture of structured training and learning on the job. I've always, and I don't know whether this is by, being fortunate to work for companies who really embrace new ideas. And if you want to put your hand up and say, I've got a good idea or an idea for a project that I think would be really good, and they say, yeah, great, off you go and do it. And I think it's a bit of that, plus,
mm,
I'm always looking for something else, something more to do. So
mm,
I'll always find another project to work on, or a gap that needs filling. So I think a combination of both my kind of eagerness to keep learning, keep growing, keep doing things, plus plus the kind of appetite from the organisations to allow you to do that as well. I think is a bit of both. But yeah, more
mm.
recently I've done training with the IOIC. I did the masters in internal communications last year, which I would highly recommend to
Yeah.
anybody in internal communications. Like it's in, in like an incredible eye opener, like a huge amount of hard work, but it really gives so much depth to what we do,
Mm,
and really opens your eyes to the potential that we have to kind of influence the business. And I
mm,
think that um, you know all of us that completed it, I think we all feel much more confident, more rounded in what we do. um, I think it was an invaluable experience,
mm.
actually. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, many congratulations on completing
Thank
it as
you.
well.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
excellent, excellent. So yeah, let's move on then, because I think that sort of pivots nicely into what I want to talk about, the bulk of what we wanted to talk about, which is this, as I said, and I think this is not just with learning and development and I find this across a lot of the organizations we work with. We're working with learning and development, HR, organizational development, change management, if they have that sort of project management, obviously internal communications. And there's this continuum of people who have an involvement, particularly in these sort of transformational projects. But I guess, as I said, learning and development and IC do share a very sort of similar DNA, I guess, kind of heritage in terms of what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to change behavior through different ways, or obviously bring skills or new capabilities to the organization. They both play an important role in that. What are the connections you see between L&D and internal comms, and then we can talk a little bit about how successful partnerships between those two specialisms can lead to sort of better outcomes for the organization. But what, that's my perspective. What have you seen in your career when it comes to L&D and IC working together?
Yeah, I think IC has a unique role in the organization, that we work quite neutrally with lots of functions and lots of people right across the business,
Mm,
L&D being one of those. So I think well, I've certainly always been careful and, I guess, intentional about having a good relationship with any of the stakeholders that I work with, because that enables me to do a better job for them, because either that means they're going to come to me earlier because they know I'm going to give them what they want at the end, and I'm going to give them good guidance along the way as well.
mm,
but I think that's true whether you were talking about the learning and development teams or anybody in the business, because IC really does have that kind of, I feel like, satellite view of what's going on. So I think we can help other functions to really be better, because we can plug in other information and other things that we know. And I think with learning and development is probably even more pertinent, because actually we might be running, I don't know, a town hall for a certain area of the business, or we could be running um, a new program that has a kind of learning element to it. So most change programs arguably have some sort of learning angle to them, because you're
Mm,
asking people to maybe do something differently than they've been done before. So I think there's often, even if you don't necessarily think about it at the very beginning, there is often some kind of learning angle to them. So yeah, I think it's about ensuring that you I think a good relationship comes with also having like very clear understanding of where your responsibilities lie as well. So
mm,
I know it's my responsibility to help communicate well within the organization so that employees understand what's going on.
mm,
And the L&D team there are there to kind of enable that kind of learning experience. So I think
mm,
I think together we can um, help the learning development team, and they
mm,
can in turn give us the content that we need to communicate. So yeah, it's
mm,
definitely a
mm,
collaborative effort.
mm. Have you seen any specific, kind of opportunities to learn? Kind of L and D have a specific skill set, and IC have their specific skill set. Have you seen any opportunities to say you kind of pick up things from learning and development, the way they do things and the way they approach, the kind of the learning process and understanding different learning styles, maybe one area, and then also from an IC perspective for internal comms, helping to, kind of really understand the sort of psychology of communications and what we're trying to do, and particularly when it comes to kind of emotional connection with the messages that we're trying to share. I mean, just trying to get it. And I know I've seen these myself, and I'm interested from your perspective as to see where this sort of this kind of osmosis of things going between the two sort of specialisms has happened. What are your observations or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of learning, or like good learning programs, often they're made by the people that are leading them, in my view. So if those people have really understood the audience that they're talking to, and are have considered how best to position whatever they're trying to in knowledge they're trying to share, how best to position that so that it's more um, more the audience are more receptive to it.
Mm,
I think
yeah.
that's the key. Like I have seen people come into organisations and give a sort of training program. You think, did you know who you were talking to? Like this is not the right level, or
Mm,
it could
mm,
be like far too simplistic, or perhaps far too emotional. And I think, even though I'm a big believer in the power of emotions and using them to great communications, like people you have to warm people up to that stuff. You can't really just dive straight in. And I think when I've seen really good trainers is that they've taken people with them, and actually by the end of the sessions you see people that are like, oh, I didn't think I'd be, this feels like therapy, I didn't really expect to be
mm,
having this kind of training.
mm,
But actually so much of learning and development is about the person, about how they are, how they're entering into things. And maybe here I'm thinking particularly of kind of like, training around for managers, the sort of
mm,
leadership skill stuff. I think they're like, so much of that is about how you show up as a person,
mm,
and what you bring. And I think that it is very personal, and I think that's
Mm.
often why people struggle to do it well. So I think the
Yeah.
training programs that really tap into that and are acutely aware of that, I think, are often the best ones.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to a client about this just this week, and we were talking. She heads up an OD, and a lot of that is around learning and development. And she was talking about, and we kind of came to the same conclusion, which was, and obviously some training. I guess we're clarify. We're talking about, there is some training that is very much about technical,
Mm,
not knowledge transfer. It's about, it's either how to do something or knowledge that you need to be able to do a specific task or job or role or whatever. But a lot of the kind of what I call kind of more effective domain where we're trying to change behavior or attitudes is where I think there's this sort of strong overlap with IC. And we were talking
mm,
about that, really good training that we'd experienced, and I deliver some training as myself, was you're kind of offering ideas and models and frameworks for people to kind of internalize and think about how they're going to use it rather than being prescriptive. And
mm,
that invitation to bring them into that kind of thinking rather than, saying we're now got this set process for how we do this and you need to do this and here's the script that you need to read out versus here's a way of thinking, here's a way that we see people reacting to something, and here's a way that you might approach that might get a more successful outcome. What do you think is a much more kind of adult way of training people? And I think
mm,
that's kind of what we do with comms, isn't it? Sometimes we just have to communicate something, which just needs to be broadcast, but a lot of the comms now, it's kind of just inviting people into a way of thinking that we want them to kind of absorb and move towards rather than, kind of dictating that this is the way we do things now. And I think that
yeah.
that relationship between what good L&D looks like and what good IC looks like is very much where the two kind of come very close to each other. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And actually, I think sometimes the frustrating thing is that people actually just want you to tell me what to do, tell me what I've got to
Mm,
do, give me the clear instructions, give me the step-by-step instructions as to what I want to do. And you're absolutely right. It isn't that simple. It's not that black and white. It's
mm,
much more nuanced than that, and
mm,
it's messy actually a lot of the time. And I think, going back to my masters, that was one of my biggest, I guess, takeaways from doing that throughout all of the different modules and the things that we studied. I think it was that, communication is inherently messy because people make sense of things in different ways, and
mm,
you can craft an incredibly clear, concise, credible message that's been well thought through, and yet people will walk away from that with something entirely different because it's
mm,
been influenced by how their mood that day, their prior experience to the topic that you're talking about, their personality type. All of
mm,
these things affect how people make sense of the information that you share with them. And I used to think, oh, maybe that it's me not doing my job properly enough. Well, that maybe I didn't explain things clearly, but actually, it's definitely it's a messy business, and I think
mm,
learning and development is as well, because it rests on the individual to want to learn, to want to do things differently. You can't make people learn; they have to learn themselves, and it's the same with communication.
mm.
You can't make people understand; they have to come to that understanding themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things we talked about, and I think you've got experience in your career. I can't remember whether this was at your end, where you are now, or previous experience, but or just more in general, is the idea of the 7-2-20-10 model, which is kind of it's, if people haven't never heard of, they can Google, but this is the sort of an L&D approach, which is very much around this. If we're looking at the 70-20-10, obviously adds up to 100. If you look at what we learn on the job, or what we learn in order to help us do our jobs more effectively, 70% of that tends to come from kind of on the job experience, looks like we've been talking about today. 20% of that comes from kind of coaching and significant others, and then 10% of it comes from, kind of formal training and development, classroom kind of workshop type stuff. And I know that kind of resonated with you, and you had an experience of that. And I'm just interested in, obviously it's slightly different from an internal communications perspective, but I think that whole, kind of experiential way of internal comms often is more effective when there's a kind of an experiential element to it, and it's not just sort of reading a brief or kind of just seeing some PowerPoint slides. I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, because I know that is a model that you're familiar with, and how that's kind of shaped both what you've seen in terms of good L&D, but how that overlaps maybe in terms of good IC as well.
Yeah, I think there's I think it's very difficult to tell people how to do something or how you do something if they haven't experienced it themselves. I actually earlier this year I did a course on NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and a lot of that is about modeling. Well, it is really, it's about the model of excellence. So you look at excellence in other people and you try and you kind of model that so that you know how to kind of use it yourself, or perhaps sort of enact it yourself. And it was a fascinating course and a very different way of kind of looking at the world. But I think that sense of modeling is really interesting from a communication point of view, because you have to be able to experience what you do in order to understand where it's working and where it's not working, and how to do things differently. Because arguably a lot of the things that come our way, you could say, they do follow a similar format. We take a brief, we try and understand what the client's trying to do. We then craft some messages around that and propose a sort of plan to communicate it. There is a kind of formula to that. But of course, what's different each time is the subject matter and the people that it's impacting. And so you have to take a kind of bespoke approach to it. And I think you get good at that through the experience that you've had on other initiatives, whether they're entirely in the same kind of area or on a completely different topic. But I think it's difficult to learn that other than by doing. But yeah, I think on the 70-20-10 thing, we're actually introducing that at Temenos at the moment, really to try and I think the new framework is really there. We've had feedback from people saying that actually, we don't necessarily feel like we can learn and develop our careers at Temenos. And actually, as an organization, we think that can't possibly be true, given the amount of potential that we've got in the industry to kind of transform banking, and that technology is changing so much. The company is at the moment kind of moving more towards software as a service, to a SaaS business model. So we're no longer kind of selling pieces of software to banks and saying, "Oh, thanks very much. We'll see you in 5 or 10 years when you're ready to upgrade." We're now upgrading on a continuous basis, providing a real service to customers. So that kind of changes everything around the way we sell and service our customers. And so that's, through that, we're asking employees to think differently and to work differently. And there needs to be a sort of program or a learning framework really around that. And so we're using the 70-20-10 model to help people see what's available, so that both we're kind of arming them with new skills for the future, but also reminding them that actually so much of their learning comes through on the job experience, through the projects that they do, through the sales activity that they're running, and from watching the people around them and from modeling their behavior. Like, so much of it comes through that. and only 10% of it is actually through the kind of traditional classroom training that perhaps we traditionally think of when we think of learning and development. And so my job in that is really trying to kind of help really kind of piece that all together and make sense of it for people. And on a very sort of tactical level, the first thing we're doing is really creating a new intranet site that really explains that framework and then gives kind of tailored content according to the different sort of functions in the business. So, but yeah, I definitely think that you learn from loads of different ways, from things of doing, from the people around you, and then in a more traditional sense. So I think it makes sense for companies to kind of adopt that as a framework.
Yeah, it's just interesting when you were talking there, and it's sort of like a bit of a sort of a penny dropping moment for me, because we were talking about the 70-20-10, and I guess, when you think about it, what the 70-20-10, if you embrace that fully, takes away. If you look at then what's the role of L&D in that, they've clearly got a big involvement in the 10%, because that's kind of what they do. The 20%, they've got kind of maybe a role in facilitating that, kind of coaching and mentoring, that sort of thing. But then when it goes into the 70%, the stuff that's happening in the organization, that's where that kind of opens up to a much broader range of people who have a role in shaping that, and particularly IC plays a huge role in that, in terms of kind of curating the kind of meaning that people draw from, not only from the experiences they're having, but kind of shaping that into a kind of an overall kind of organizational narrative. So I've never really thought about that, but yeah, that's a really interesting kind of.
And interestingly, that to exactly that point, the sort of learning project, if I can call it that we're running at the moment, isn't being run by or led by L&D and HR. It's being led by the business, because the company has really recognized, that actually it's in the business's interest to have skilled, knowledgeable people. That's the results are going to come through the sales that we get as a result, and through the growth in our business. And so yes, HR and L&D are there to kind of enable it and facilitate it, but you're absolutely right. They can't manage all of that, and
No.
I mean, no one can really. It's definitely a kind of shared responsibility.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, just sort of bringing things to a conclusion, I guess. I want to wrap up in a minute, but just one before we do that. Just any other, we talked there about 70-20-10, and obviously some of your own experience. Any other, to someone's listening to this and they're working in IC, and they're kind of, want to foster more working relationships with L&D, and they want to kind of, not reach out. That's the wrong analogy, I guess, but kind of want to recognize there's an opportunity there to work more closely, and particularly if maybe they're an organization where they're seen as sort of distinct silos. Any tips from you in terms of kind of reaching across to sort of build those? I guess it's no different building relationships with anyone else in the organization, which is always what we're trying to do in internal communications. But any sort of specific experiences you had where that's kind of gone well, or things you'd have maybe done differently if given a second chance when it comes to building those sorts of relationships?
No, I think it is just, being available, being helpful, being curious about things, asking questions, spotting gaps. Actually, somebody else said this the other day, and I thought it's a good lesson for everybody, that often in internal communications we're in meetings that are about things other than communications, and you can sit there and you can wait for somebody to say, okay, and now how are we going to communicate this? And you wait for that ask to come. Or you can also have an opinion on the topic more generally, because, as I said earlier, you have this kind of, I guess, unique vantage point where you see lots of things that are going on in the company, and you're close to the messaging, you're close to the sort of business priorities, because you're communicating all the time. And I think you also have a role to play in being the voice of the people. And I think that using that that privilege is how you influence what goes on in the business. It is how you get, if you like, repeat custom. So you do a good job, people come back to you. I mean, I've always found that if I deliver what I say I'm going to do, 9 times out of 10 people will come back to me again and ask for my help, and maybe they bring me in a bit earlier next time as well, which is always helpful. So I think it's about being consistent. It's about being really curious about things and not being afraid to hold back, really.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Emma. I mean, so what I've taken from that is from your own career, definitely, what came across to me, and I think this is anyone who's listening to this who's maybe early in their career or work, even later on in their career, there's that commitment to kind of getting involved, willingness to kind of roll your sleeves up and get stuck in. I often hear, internal communicators talking about that. They have to be really resourceful. They have to, sort of get their elbows out sometimes to get involved in some of these things where, sometimes it's a bit of an afterthought. And I think that's we can't reinforce that message enough, and obviously in a kind of respectful way. But also, what we talked about there more towards the end of, the bulk of the interview around the fact that we do have lots of shared goals and aims with other colleagues within the organisation, and L&D is kind of maybe our closest sort of link in that respect, and in a lot of organisations anyway. And there's a lot of things that we're trying to do together, and the kind of Venn diagram of shared responsibilities and objectives and kind of mutual opportunities to support each other is probably the strongest of them. And there's a lot of that, particularly when we look at that 70-20-10 model, I see plays a massive role in that, shaping that what is for many organizations becoming the kind of primary way of learning, which is that on the job, making sense of those experiences that we have on a day-to-day basis in order that we can kind of learn from that, reflect and improve and get better. So I think that's really, really strong. So look, if people want to reach out to you, I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile, which I hope is okay, into the show notes. So
yeah, of course,
they can reach out to you and say hello, and if there's anything that they want to pick up with you directly. Is there anything else that you've got that you want to share? Are you kind of active on any other social media platforms, but professionally or otherwise?
LinkedIn's the main one, really. So definitely people can reach out to me on that. I'm really passionate about internal communications, and most internal communicators, in fact, I don't know that I've ever met any that don't love what they do. I think we're all really passionate about it, and I think it, because we can have an impact, we can make a difference, and really influence how people feel about their jobs. And I think that's a real privilege and a responsibility. So, and it helps to talk to other people in the same situation. I've always found that internal communicators are very open about sharing their ideas, their experiences, and I'm certainly very willing to do that. So I'd welcome anyone to get in touch with me if they want any advice or guidance or someone to bounce ideas off. I'm always happy to do that.
Thank you. That's wonderful, Emma. And again, I guess another thing that I mentioned is generosity is a key quality as well, which I think is a great thing to have in internal comms, and you've certainly demonstrated that. So thank you so much. So look, enjoy, and we're speaking on a Friday, so enjoy your weekend that's imminently coming up.
Thank
but also,
you.
And good luck for the rest of this year. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights with us and with our listeners, Emma. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Craig. And I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. And I hope COVID isn't too harsh on you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Emma.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.